I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Bluemke.
And you're listening to the podcast for friendlyatheist.com. You can now listen to all of our episodes and see show notes at friendlyatheistpodcast.com. I am here with Dan Barker. Dan Barker is one of the co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the author of a couple really amazing books. One of them is called Godless, which kind of traces his journey from evangelical Christian pastor to an atheist. And his latest book, which he'll talk about, is called Life-Driven Purpose, which is kind of a riff on Rick Warren's book, correct?
That's right, his purpose-driven life book.
So what's the difference here?
Well, it's the difference between looking through a pair of binoculars one way and then turning it around and looking through the same pair of binoculars another way. You're not going to see the same thing. So Rick Warren and a lot of believers think there's this kind of top-down authority that purpose comes from. There's a purpose of life. And I flip it around and say, nope, it's not purpose-driven life. It's life-driven purpose, bottom up.
So one of the things I remember reading in that book, which I thought I loved the passage, was about Jesus and a basement. Do you mind going over what that passage is all about?
That's a talk that I've been given. I've done it 3 or 4 times. Some people call it Christianity in a nutshell, but it takes 2 or 3 minutes. But it's if I were to come out on my front porch and yell to you while you're walking by, "Hey, I got some good news! I got some great news for you. You don't have to go down to my basement, and you've been ignoring me, and I've it made me really angry, and I'm important, and you need to respect me." So I built a torture chamber down in my basement, and the good news is you don't have to go down there. There's fire and there's knives and there's these vats and there's this, it's horrible. But I sent my son down there, and it was a horrible passion of the Christ, but he suffered for you, and now my anger is satisfied, and I'm not mad anymore. And all you have to do, come up on my porch and tell me how much you love me, and hug my son, and we'll live together up in the attic, and you can tell me how great I am forever and ever. It's a little spoof on, actually, that's the good news of the gospel. That's basically what it's all about.
Right. That would be horrifying if I saw it on the news, but that's the good news we're supposed to learn from the Bible.
So I end it by saying, so you're walking by, what would you do? Would you keep walking, or would you want to go up and meet
I got to see this basement. Yeah. Right. So what's the reaction you've gotten from this particular book? Is it different from anything you've gotten in the past?
Well, as usual, most of the angry reaction I get from books like this are from people who never read it.
Of course.
And in fact, they go on Amazon and they write a review of a book they've never read. But
Reading is hard.
They just know from the title, this has to be horrible. And I do make a comparison between purpose-driven life and life-driven purpose. A purpose-driven life, if you need a purpose of life, it's like having a slave master above you. So really, Christianity and most world religions boil down to you being this humble slave of some big master. And if you look at the postures of prayer, what are they? Your head's bowed, your eyes are shut, you're kneeled prostrate, your hands are shackled together in humble obedience that you're no threat to the big alpha male up there who's the Lord. And a lot of people tell me, that's not Christianity. Christianity is not slavery, even though Paul said, I'm a slave of Christ, the doulos. A lot of Christians think I am mischaracterizing the God of the Bible by painting him in these kind of, what they think are kind of crude terms, But actually, that's kind of what it is. It's a slave mentality of the Scriptures.
And you're not coming at this out of nowhere. I mean, you spent quite a long time in that Christian world.
I was proud to call myself a slave of Christ because that gave me purpose. And I preached for 19 years trying to get other people to become slaves, which is what Rick Warren is doing. All Christian ministers are slave traders. They're trying to get people to submit to this master, this sovereign. Here in a country where we kicked out the sovereign Lord, we flipped it upside down in America. Instead of having a constitution based on some authority of some monarch or some lord, we flipped it upside down and said, nope, it's we the people. And here's still a lot of people making a living trying to get people to flip that around and say, we are not the sovereign authority. There's some big God Lord above us.
So now some Christians are going to hear you say that. The I'm not a slave master. That's a horrible thing to say. Well, how do you tell them, how do you react to that?
Well, I would tell them, read the Bible. That's exactly what the Bible says. So if they want to be good Christians and good followers of the Bible, they need to submit as unthinking slaves to a master.
In your experience, like, I don't know if you can give me a percentage or something or a ballpark, but how many Christians have you met who have read it, who have read the Bible?
Well, every Christian says they have read the Bible, at least 2 or 3 verses. They say that. But I think it's like 1% who actually read anything more than what they hear on Sunday morning. John 3:16 and the 23rd Psalm and a few verses here and there. They all think they know an awful lot about it. They think, but when I quote Bible verses to them, for example, I'll quote that verse. I'll compliment Jesus, for example, in the book of Luke. I'll compliment Jesus for being so compassionate that he said there are some slaves that you should not beat as hard as other slaves because they didn't know better, right? And they say, that's not in the Bible. Jesus didn't say you should beat slaves. And I open it and show them in Luke chapter 14. It actually, in Luke chapter 12, it actually says you should do that. Well, you're misinterpreting it. You're taking it out of context. You don't understand metaphor. I mean, you hear all these arguments. They actually haven't read it, but they know that it's out of context. They haven't read it, but they know it's metaphorical.
Because
right?
the book is supposed to be all good.
Yeah, it is. By definition, it's a good. It's right on the cover, the good book. So,
do you think you've gotten more criticism maybe for your books, for your writing, for your public speeches, because you do so many of them, or simply because you help run Freedom from Religion Foundation?
It's both. It's both. I do a lot of debates, which for me is the funnest thing in the world. I just did debate number 121 in Dallas. And that sounds like a lot,
It does.
But my first one was in February of 1985.
Okay, so you've had some time to stretch these out.
Yeah, it's like over 30 years. That's like what? Like 4 a year.
Yeah.
It's a lot of debates,
Always against different people?
Not always. I did 8 with Dinesh D'Souza.
Okay.
8 debates in as many states.
Pre-jail Dinesh D'Souza? Okay.
I actually met the woman, by the way. Do you know the woman that he left his wife for?
I heard.
Yeah,
I don't know her.
We did a debate in Messiah College in Pennsylvania, and they told the Christian organizers, he told them, I'm bringing my assistant with me. So we were having dinner in the president's home, and there's this young woman sitting next to Dinesh, and nobody knew anything about it. And I had met his family like a couple years before. And so I leaned over and I said to this young woman, I said, so are you Dinesh's daughter?
Oh, no.
And he leaned in. She's my fiance.
Oh, no.
Oh, and you should have seen the eyebrows of all the Christian. He told us he was bringing his assistant, and they only needed 1 hotel room. And he hadn't filed for divorce yet. Anyway.
Right. And this was public. This became a news story in and of itself.
Well, like 2 days later.
Yeah.
Well, finally, when it came out, and then he got fired from King's College. And
right.
And see, I didn't care. I actually went up to him afterwards, and I said, congratulations. I'm not moralistic about somebody's, marriages fall apart and you get remarried. Mm-hmm. But the hypocrisy here is Dinesh is a guy who's written these books about the evils of infidelity and fornication, and America's going down this moral hill. And so there's a real hypocrisy there for him to say one thing and live his life, another way.
Hear that, Gawker? Uh-huh. So when you debate someone 8 times, what do you pick up on? Like, do you use information from debate like 2 and then bring it back in debate 7?
Well, yeah, kind of, because and the topics are always different.
Sure.
They're not always, does God exist? Sometimes is Christianity a good force for the world or whatever? Or can you be good without God? But Dinesh has about, at least he has about 6 or 8 of these kind of snappy, witty one-liners that he uses. And so after he used the same one 3 or 4 times, I found some ways to snap back at those, which was kind of...
Or you can use them before he gets a chance to.
Well, they're not that good. I'll let him use them.
Do you get to know your opponent really well in the sense that, like, is there like a begrudging respect for someone you debate multiple times? Or is it just like, oh, God, this guy again. All right, I'll trash him another time.
The debates happen at so many different levels. So at the personal level, we actually got along fine. We talk about our families, and because you're cordial, right? You're human beings,
sure.
Right? But then there's the on, like in quotes, you're on. You have to be before an audience.
Yeah.
At that level, there's a different personality that you're talking with. And maybe we're all like that. Maybe when we're giving a talk, when you're giving one of your great speeches, you're him at the speaker, and rather than, by the way, we're both friendly atheists.
I know.
Did you know that? Yeah.
I heard.
Yeah. So what does that make? Atheism squared or something?
Something like that.
Friendly square. But we both realize in one sense, and this isn't hypocritical, but in one sense it's a show. We're doing a public event for a certain purpose that's above and beyond actually convincing your opponent. The purpose could be to bring a crowd of free thinkers together for an event, or it could be educational, or it could be PR, or whatever. There's all sorts of other things happening at different levels. So at that higher level, we do have a kind of appreciative respect that at least there's somebody who's willing to do a debate like this so that we can put on events like this. That's kind of neat that you find believers who are willing to do that.
One of the reasons I don't do debates is, maybe it's not the only reason, but do you ever think, I know I'm never going to convince someone like Dinesh D'Souza to come over to my side on this issue, so we kind of are putting on this show because I want to convince the audience.
Yeah.
This is the same thing I had with the Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate, which is these guys are not going to convince each other to adopt each other's views. They're really putting on a show. And to me, there's something just weird about that. I would rather do a debate only if I thought, okay, well, I'm going to really try to convince this other person on stage. That would be interesting to me. And then if the audience comes along for the ride, great. I don't know. There's something about a debate that just seems like a charade in some sense.
Well, I agree with you there. There's a level of showmanship involved. And it's an event. It's a public thing, right? So I agree with you about that, but I think it's the other way around. I'm aiming at those. When it's happening at a university, there's a big chunk of maybe 20% of the audience that really is in the middle. They're at school. They're away from their home for the first time. They're away from their church. They're coming to school to see a variety of viewpoints. I'm aiming at them, and ideally, wouldn't it be great if Dinesh changed his mind, Right. But that's a long shot. I mean, that's not the goal of going into debate, to change his mind. And we both know that. Mm-hmm. If you're committed enough to agree to do a debate, you're really committed to your point of view. So we both know that. You might get a little concession or two out of either one of us about some little point here and there, which is fine. But I get letters and emails from people who say that debate got them thinking. And I heard from a guy who was on the side of my opponent. He was one of his research assistants who later changed his mind. And he said, it didn't happen during your debate, but that was sort of nudging me. So it does happen. People do change their mind, and the more open and educational we can be about it. I wouldn't say let's write off the opponent, but the probability is so low that your opponent is going to change that you should focus on talking to the people out in the audience.
So when you go into these debates, are you thinking like Dinesh D'Souza? I mean, I don't know the guy personally, but I'm thinking, I know he's a good speaker. I know he's a good performer when it comes to these debates. Yeah. He's wrong on these issues. Is the thought process like, okay, that'll be a fun debate because I know people are going to be interested in both ways. No one's going to fall asleep during that debate. So there's this kind of like, all right, I like that guy. I disagree with him, but I like that guy.
Yeah, and as far as performance goes, he's one of the best. He's not one of the best thinkers. But I think that way about C.S. Lewis, for example. I think C.S. Lewis was a great, brilliant writer. I don't think his ideas were very good. I think they were wrong. But boy, I wish I could write like C.S. Lewis. So you might see a Christian debater and go, wow, he's nuts. But I love the way he makes his points. And so in a debate, you want it to at least look like it's a fair fight. I get criticized sometimes for doing debates with local ministers who don't know what they're talking about, and then the Christians come up and say, "You shouldn't have debated that guy. You should have debated somebody else." So you want it to look like it's both sides are fair and balanced.
Sure. So let me jump to Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with the organization, but give us a sense of how many cases do you guys deal with every year? What are the big things you do? How many staff do you have at this point? And how many members? Because every time I hear these numbers, they just keep getting bigger.
We passed 23,000 members a couple of months ago, and it's at the point where it's kind of fluctuating. But I think we're now solidly above 23.
Wow.
Because you lose people. You lose, there's attrition, and you lose.
Why do you lose people?
Well,
is it frustration with FFRF, or is it like I became a Christian? Or?
Well, one of the reasons we lose people is we have a kind of an older membership.
Yeah.
About a third of our members are retired or more. And that's kind of a bittersweet way of losing somebody. But also, a bunch of people try you out for 1 year, and they don't renew.
Okay.
If they renew for that second year, you've got them, right? So they're like trying you out. Yeah, send me your sample, and I'll join. So for a group like ours, just to stay flat is an accomplishment. Because you're always going to be losing. People move, they lose track, or they can't afford it this year. So We just expanded our national headquarters.
Yeah, you built like a new addition to the old building.
You were in the old building, right?
I've seen the old building. I have not seen the new building.
You have to come and see it. We have 4 times the space now.
Wow.
And we actually have
For anyone who, if you haven't been to this place, when I saw the old building, yeah. They had a lot of staff working in very limited space, and all the material, like the newspapers, the products that you guys have, they're jam-packed. It's like you're moving from like a big, 3-bedroom big house into a studio. Like everything's just crammed everywhere.
It was horrible.
And that's not the case now?
But you know what? Nobody was complaining. Our attorneys were just happy with the work. You should have seen Andrew. Maybe you saw Andrew's desk. It was just a little desk in a corner of what was an old living room.
Right.
That's his attorney's office. Andrew now has, and Sam and Patrick and Liz and Rebecca now have actual offices with doors, you know what I mean?
Well deserved.
So when he's doing a radio interview, he can shut the door and he can scream at the host all he wants.
There you go.
And so we have, I think it's 17 now, because there's summer help that comes and goes.
Yeah.
17 full-time staff now, including 5 full-time attorneys and 2 full-time legal fellows. They're attorneys too. They're working on a fellowship for like a 1-year thing. So we have 7 attorneys in there, plus 2 to 5 legal interns. We have legal intern stations. So last week, 2 weeks ago at our legal meeting, there was 15 people at the meeting, which was amazing that we have a meeting talking about legal strategy with 15 people.
And what's going on at these legal meetings?
Well, we're talking.
Is it just like let's all denounce Christianity? No, that's what's going on.
It's a state church thing.
Yeah.
Our legal. The main purpose of the Freedom from Religion Foundation is to keep religion and government separate. So. There's a report about how many letters went out last week, how many complaints, how many victories. A lot of victories we get without going to court, which is your goal. The law's already settled, so we write letters to a high school principal or a mayor or a county executive and president of a school board. Here's what the law says: you should stop doing this illegal religious thing. And often they will agree and they'll stop. Sometimes because they agree with us, sometimes because they don't want to risk spending the money on a lawsuit, right? Which is kind of cool. I think I can announce now, we just settled a lawsuit in Georgia, which they were fighting, and they finally agreed, this is going to cost too much. Well, they spent many thousands of dollars fighting us before they decided to quit fighting us. So what our staff, especially Andrew, but what our staff wants to use now in Georgia is say, look, we're not just complaining. There's teeth behind it. We might, and we can, and we do sue. And look at this school district had to pay this many tens of thousands of dollars, so this could happen to you too.
So if I'm a critic, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, I'm going to say, so you're just bullying these schools into saying, look, it's going to cost you money if we come after you. You're better off just doing what we say.
Actually, that argument is doing them a favor because, like in Ohio with the Jesus painting, the public official, whoever it is.
This is a painting at a public school.
A painting of Jesus hanging on a public school wall, which the principal said, that's not coming down without a court order. So, we got a court order and it came down. So, actually, we did the principal a favor because the principal was able to get up and say, I disagree with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I think Jesus painting should stay, but we can't afford it.
So they get to save face.
Yeah, he gets to hold his head up and say, do we want to divert money from a poor school district when we should be helping our kids and we're going to spend $100,000 fighting a lawsuit about a Jesus painting? So he was able to say both things at once, and we don't care what they say as long as they do the right thing.
So one of the things that always surprises me, every time I see FFRF send these letters or file a lawsuit, let's take that Jesus painting, for example. This is just a painting of Jesus hanging in high. That is so undoubtedly wrong and illegal. So if you guys say we're going to file a lawsuit, I'm thinking, well, of course you're going to win. Like that's really not in doubt. And every time you guys file a lawsuit, that's usually at least on a high school level or with city councils and stuff. It's like, yeah, well, of course you're going to win. This is unequivocally wrong. Why do these Christian legal groups take on these lawsuits? Do they really think they're going to win?
Well, yeah, they do. They think they can get judges on their side to continue. Some of them think they can overturn the law on which our victory is based. Some of them want to do that. But there's 2 levels here. The local person, the principal, in this case, in this high school in Ohio, I think their judgment has been clouded by their religion, their moral judgment, their legal judgment. Jesus is important to them. Jesus is real to them. And they don't want to be the principal that takes Jesus off the wall. I mean, think about doing that in that small community, right? So think of the feelings that person has. I don't want to be seen as that principal, right? But the groups, the Liberty Liberty Council and these other right-wing groups that go against us, they should be sending us an award, because whenever we file a complaint or write a letter, they get to then hit all of their supporters with, help us fight the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They use our complaints to raise money, even if they don't think they can win.
But that's what I'm getting at. Like, I get that.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. But it would be dirty to say, like, well, look, we know we're going to lose this case, but we're going to try to fight it because we'll get their membership, we'll get their money, we'll get their respect. Yeah, we're going to lose, but whatever. That's just, liberals coming after us.
I think they
but
don't.
Do they really think they're going to win these cases?
I think they actually do. Any individuals who are going to take the trouble to start a right-wing Christian legal group cares about it enough. They really think America's a Christian nation and things have gone really bad, and they're here to try to fix it. And even if they lose, knowingly, they're still doing the right thing. And so they want to be seen by their supporters as doing the right thing. And yeah, we lost this case, but we fought for Jesus.
How much interaction does FFRF and your attorneys have with their side?
Well, you have to talk. In fact, sometimes it's very friendly. I mean, attorneys in any case can sometimes be very cordial. And you have to be when you're talking about both of you presenting to a judge, right? Both of you going to a judge. So there is some interaction.
What are those conversations like?
Well, they're technical, mostly. It's not like on issues. Very rarely do we argue about that stuff. It's technical.
You're not having a debate over the phone on these issues.
No. But we might on a TV interview.
Right.
I mean, we might get called by Fox News to do what about this lawsuit? And then you're going at it over the issues, right?
Right.
But a more interesting interaction is between the free thought groups. The American Humanists and the Center for Inquiry, and American Atheists and the ACLU.
Yeah.
All of the attorneys in this sort of milieu of free thought, skeptical organizations, we all know each other. They all know each other. They're all friendly, and we're comparing strategies. And often we will coordinate amicus briefs for each other. Like CFI might be filing a lawsuit, and then we could offer to write an amicus brief for them. In fact, one of our legal fellows this year, Kat Page, who worked for us, is just now leaving to go work in D.C. for the American Humanists Association on their legal team. So there's a lot of that kind of cross-pollination where in one level, we're kind of friendly competitors, as organizations. At the other level, though, we work together admirably, I think, in sharing resources because we want to win these cases.
Right. So this is interesting because, I don't know, 10 years ago, I'm totally making this number up. 10 years ago, FFRF was doing its thing, but I didn't, and of course the ACLU and Americans United was around too. But we've seen more lawsuits or letters sent from groups like the American Humanist Association. Like they really ramped up their legal side. CFI has been filing more lawsuits in some cases. Is that competition? Or is that, like, how can you guys work together when you are all, in a sense, competing for donors and members, things like that?
Well, it is a very friendly, positive competition, I think. Athletes can compete with each other, but they love each other. You know what I mean? It's like, you admire their effort and you admire what they're doing. And competing is not this, right? In the nonprofit world, it's not like business, like for-profit competition. There's a lot of people, and maybe you're one of those, who join all the groups.
Yeah.
It's not like in religion, you have to be a Methodist or a Baptist. There's people who join FFRF and CFI and AHA, and they join all the...
Because you support all of their missions.
Yeah, because you want to get the literature and you care. And so it's not like we can add up the total numbers of all the groups to get a total, because there's so much overlap.
How do you make sure you don't double dip in certain stories? Because if a high school principal says, I'm going to pray to Jesus over the loudspeaker in the morning... how do you know, like, okay, we're going to send a letter to this district saying you can't do that? Well, what if, the American Humanist Association is already doing... Is there a way to communicate to make sure you're not double dipping?
And that just kind of happens naturally just by talking. But that happens once in a while, but usually it's the first complaint that comes in to whatever group who then sends the letter out.
Uh-huh.
So, Americans United might get a complaint from a high school student, and so they'll send a letter to that school. And then we might send one too, maybe the next day. So in the media, it looks like different groups are sending letters in that. So sometimes at the end of the day, you don't remember who filed the first one. I mean, and there's a little bit of wanting to acknowledge the credit because we have supporters who are giving money to an organization to do this work. And so if we started a lawsuit or a complaint, we want it to be known. We are the ones who started this. They contacted us and we wrote the letter. But we're all happy for others to jump in because more pressure to the principal or the president of the school board.
Are things getting better or worse? Because I'm guessing with more attorneys, you're taking on a lot more cases. But is that a bad sign or a good sign?
It's kind of like being a victim of your own success. I remember back when we would have one victory a month to report, and it was big news.
Sure.
We stopped some high school choir director from having a Jesus concert in Christmas time, something like that. And now we have to put the victories back on page 5 and 6 out of our newspaper now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's 12 or 20 of them each month, actual clear victories with or without going to court. So I think the fact that groups like ours are complaining more and being more effective attracts more people. Because you say, well, who are you going to call, right? You're going to call Faith Busters. You're going to call FFRF. And so it's kind of cool. We got more than 3,000 complaints last year.
Jeez.
You can't act on all of them.
Right.
Some of the complaints you have to tell them we can't do anything about this. Some of the complaints are personal. Then we wouldn't sue over a personal complaint.
Like my mother-in-law is making me take my kids to church,
or something like that. Yeah. Or some of it's employment related. But we sent way over 1,000 initial letters of complaint last year,
saying you're doing something wrong. Here's why it's wrong. You should fix this now.
Yeah, and let us know that you fixed it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and a good chunk of those are solved immediately. They just say, okay, we're going to stop this, especially when they know, the Freedom from Religion Foundation does take lawsuits. Some of them dig in, though. Some of them don't. It depends on. It's not just the South, but it can be anywhere. There's a city up in across from La Crosse, Wisconsin, La Crescent. They seem to be digging in on this big cross that's up over there on the river. And some of them are doing it for political reasons. They want to be seen in that community as the person who fought for the Bible, right? Regardless of whether it's right or wrong, they want to get reelected by these people. So we really don't want to go to court, but we have to. You can't just rattle sabers. You have to show that you have some teeth in your complaints. We do it, and we will, and we win, and it's going to cost you. So,
we talked a lot about high school. This is going on. Where do you see the most number of complaints? Is it at a school district, or is it in city councils, or somewhere else?
The majority of our complaints are school-related.
Why?
I guess because of the vulnerability of students. And we can do more at the high school level because the court has always been more concerned about younger people. At the college level, it's harder. But at the secondary level and below, it's actually not that hard to correct an abuse, even when there's opposition from the school. So, but we do get a lot of symbolic nativity scenes, Ten Commandments monuments, those kind of things. Public money going to private religious groups, public prayer before city council meetings. And, our chapter in Florida is suing over a county, Brevard County, that since the Greece decision, allows sectarian prayer now, but you can't discriminate. Brevard County is telling our chapter and our people down there that that non-believers can't do it. So this is the first case since the Greece decision that's going to test, what it means to have non-sectarian prayers. Because non-believers want to have their secular invocations, and they've been doing it all over the country.
Do you think the Greece ruling that said you can have these religious invocations, but they got to be open to everyone, is that a victory or a defeat? Because on paper, that was a defeat for atheists.
Yeah, it's a defeat. Yeah, it's a bad decision. And it was based to some degree on the Marsh decision, Marsh v. Chambers, 1983. In fact, we just had Ernie Chambers on our radio show this week, and he's coming to talk to our convention.
And he's the highest-ranking highest-ranking open atheist in U.S. politics, right? He's the Nebraska state senator.
I don't know if he's the highest ranking, but he's been out for years.
Yeah.
He's a 40-year senator in the state of Nebraska.
Yeah.
A long
He had just
time.
got the death penalty overturned in Nebraska.
Yeah, just this last May.
Yeah.
Pretty much every single session, Ernie Chambers has introduced a repeal of the death penalty. For 40 years, they term limited him out. By the way, they got it changed so that there were term limits. So he waited for 4 years and he ran again and got reelected. So he's back in again. They tried to get rid of him.
They love him, yeah.
His constituents love him,
right?
And the rest of this conservative state hates him. But he managed to get And he said it was a really surprise. It was kind of a fluke because there were a whole bunch of brand new conservative members of the Senate who voted with him on this death penalty thing. So they hadn't been in long enough, I guess.
To hate him.
Well,
They didn't know how it was supposed to work.
But anyway, persistence pays off. And but what a character.
Yeah.
But for someone like him, he sued God, a couple of years ago. Did you see that?
Yes.
It was kind of a protest of frivolous lawsuits. So he sued God for acts of God, and he couldn't be served because God didn't have an address. It was something funny. And Ernie says, but God doesn't need an address. He's everywhere. He's just telling the judge. This is
what happens when you let an atheist loose in politics. So the Greece case, though, you were saying it is a defeat, even though atheists can now give these invocations and file lawsuits if they're told, no, you can't give one.
Well, see, this strategy now is kind of a drop back and punt strategy. It's a plan B. We don't think there should be prayers at city council meetings, but since the Supreme Court allows them, we want to test how sincere the decision was in saying that you can't have any viewpoint discrimination. So a lot of cities and counties know that, and they're letting atheists and agnostics and others and Wiccans come in because they don't want to give up their local priests and preachers, so they're going to have to begrudgingly allow anyone in the community. So, we have a contest, and nothing feels like for a contest, that if you will deliver one of these secular invocations and get it videotaped, then we will judge, and I think it's 5 people we fly to our convention to give it at our convention. And this year you can give it in front of Ron Reagan. Ron Reagan's coming to talk at our convention.
That's awesome. President Reagan's son.
Yeah.
Who's an atheist.
Yeah.
So let's talk about him. That commercial has been playing several times. This commercial for FFRF featuring Reagan's son, Ron Reagan, saying, I'm an atheist and I'm not afraid of burning in hell.
Yeah.
And every time that airs, if you do like a Twitter search for like Reagan or something, people are flipping out over this commercial.
And you should see our phone calls.
Oh, I'm sure. What is the response you've been getting?
Well, it's beautiful because it's there's no gray area responses. We're getting the lovers and the haters that call us. And boy, the people who hate or people call up, I want to talk to Ron Reagan. That's not really Reagan's son, was it? Why would he say something like that? And then some of them are, we've had to have like restraining orders and some of them are trying to tie up our phone system and spoof our, all that kind of crap. But people who call from somebody says, I never knew. This is wonderful. I'm the only atheist in North Dakota.
And this is their first exposure to an atheist?
And they're all their life. They didn't realize there's other people,
Have they heard of the internet?
Well, some of the older ones, maybe not. You
Right.
know? We have members of our group who don't own a computer.
Wow.
And have you ever heard of postage stamps?
I've heard of these things.
Yeah, they stick on an envelope. The people like that. That's how they communicate. Still, wonderful people. But it's great to get the calls from the supporters who are so happy. It depends what medium. It depends what show you're on. We did a lot on the Daily Show and some on CNN, and all 3 major networks censored it. And it was CBS or NBC, I forget which one, told Annie Laurie, if you just take off that last line, we'll run it.
I'm an atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
Yeah, if you just take off, not afraid of burning, then we'll run it. And she said, well, that's the whole point of it, Right. And besides, why are you in censorship? Isn't this a free country? And we're paying you for this ad. And yet you don't want to run a paid ad from us, right? So that shows you the power of religion and even in the media.
Since you brought up the Daily Show, I think you've done it twice now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Twice now. And every time, so they're doing a story. I think one of the stories, the more recent one, was like a ladies' diner. What was the story there?
Yeah, Mary's Diner in North Carolina, Winston-Salem, was offering a 15% discount to people who prayed before their meal.
And FFRF decided to send a letter saying you can't do that.
Yeah, we informed her of the law. It was not a threatening letter, although if you watch that Daily Show clip, FFRF, you threatened them with a lawsuit. Of course, we didn't, but
Right.
we were just informing her. And she did the right thing. She said, okay, thank you for... And so she stopped the practice, right?
Right.
But the local media made a big deal out of it. So
well, sure, it's a juicy story. And then, so the Daily Show comes in. They are on the side of the business owner here saying, well, it's a 15% discount for prayer. Why are these Daily Show being so, quote unquote, a liberal show? They were against FFRF on these
They were
things.
spoofing me and FFRF, And so when I pointed out that, well, the Civil Rights Act is not just race, but it's also religion and, all these other things. You're comparing this to Martin Luther King and the civil rights, a prayer discount, and you're comparing that? Aren't you over? They made this big, weird, if you saw it, this overblown, like we were trying to say, this is just as important as marching for freedom with Martin Luther King, right? And we never said that. And in fact, the business owner did the right thing and even agreed with us about that. But it was a skit. It was just
when you go into that. How did they contact you? Did they say, "Hey, we're the Daily Show and we want to make fun of you"? Like, what did they say?
No, they want to do an interview about the issue. And
do you know you're going to be the butt of their tirade?
No, because if anything, you and I would think that restaurant owner should be the butt of the joke. Okay. Right? You would think that would be the joke. Here's a restaurant giving, but I forget the guy's name.
Jordan Klepper?
Was that his name? Yeah,
I think that was the guy who did the interview, yeah.
So he's trying to make a skit that's funny, ha, ha, ha. And so we all know that. And I signed this waiver thing, and I looked at
knowing that they're going to edit this to do whatever they want.
Yeah, and the first time I did was with the Mother Teresa thing, and half of them were atheists.
Oh, sure.
The main writer, he said, "We agree with you guys," and they were really like, "This is great work you're doing," but they had a show to make, and they were going to poke fun at us, so they did, and it was kind of weird. And I asked the editor after we did a 2.5-hour interview, talking about in depth about a lot of stuff, in depth, but they boiled it down to like 2 sentences, right?
Right.
So the stuff they only put in something that would make it look like ha ha. And I asked the editor, I said, "You're the guy with the power here, aren't you? You can," and I could see what they were doing. In fact, they were filming one question, but then they would edit in the answer to another question. They could do it, and he said, "Yep, if I wanted to, I could make you say, 'I like altar boys.'" And I signed a thing that said he had the right to do that, which is kind of scary. And
you don't see the final product until it's on air.
No, and so we're thinking, oh, good, what's it going to be? And then, oh, well. But
that's what they did to you the first time, though, right? With the Mother Teresa story.
Yeah.
So you knew that they're probably going to do the same thing again.
There was a possibility, yeah. But at least in both of those shows, there was 1 or 2 sentences of mine that they kept that were spot on.
Okay.
Right? And then they played off of it.
Sure.
So at least I made my point. They were at least fair enough to let me say what we want to say, maybe incomplete, because what are you going to do like in a 90-second deal? But still. So if you just take those comments, I laid forth the issues there.
What response do you get to those segments?
We usually get pretty good. We hear from some mad atheists who said, "Why did you go on that show?" And you just want to let them kick you around, and but we do hear from people who said, "You know what? They really treated you like crap. That host was missing the issue." So there's a lot of smart viewers who can see through the whole joke, right?
Yeah, and I have to think, like, a lot of the critics who complain about it, like, if the Daily Show said we want to do a segment with you, or Fox News said we want to have an interview with you on air, if you work with an organization, that's very hard to say no to, even though you know how this is going to go.
Or you suspect it. You don't know. He could have gone either way. What would you have done if they'd called you for that segment?
I would have done it.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Well, and there's an adventure to it, too.
Yeah.
You go to New York, and they put you in a nice 5-star hotel, and there's limousine service, and this whole thing, and I had a view of the New York skyline, all that. And then you're interviewed. I mean, there's something fun about that whole process.
Yeah.
But then you don't know what they're going to do with their pair of scissors afterwards.
Right. And it's interesting only because you know that so much of the staff probably agrees with you on the issue, but...
I'm sure half of them they're New York City liberal atheist types, and but they want the laugh.
Sure.
And they've got careers to build. The other one was Jason Jones,
Yeah.
That was, and he's made a pretty good career in life, but part of that was doing these skits that, ha, ha, ha.
Well, it's not funny if everyone's just like, yep, you're right on your point.
Yeah.
I guess this segment's over. I mean, there's no segment there.
But, after all is said and done, no matter what happened, I can at least say I was on The Daily Show.
Right.
Twice. You can at least say that, and don't watch it, but I was on...
What has been the biggest change since you began at FFRF till now? What have the trends been? I mean, we always hear about the rise of the nuns, so we know the membership is growing and there are more atheists willing to say that. But as an organization, like, what has changed maybe from when you started working there to now?
In principle, nothing's changed. The same two purposes, state church and educating about free thought, hasn't changed. It's just the level of it has ramped up. So now with a bigger legal staff and a larger organization, and when you've been around for 4 decades, you can finally get to a place where you have some resources, where we can send some money to Taslima Nasreen to help her get out of India because of the death threats against her, where we can send some money to some country for relief. In fact, we just started another organization called Non-Belief Relief because a lot of our foundation members want to help. So, and there's more news behind that we can talk about later, dealing with the IRS. But with more resources, then we can actually do more things. We can help the Secular Student Alliance, and we can, anytime the Secular Student Alliance needs a speaker from FFRF, if it's a SSA group, we'll pay the expenses of getting the speaker there. Like when Andrew goes to talk on a college campus, or Rebecca or Sam or Patrick, or myself or Annie Laurie. So we're comfortable enough to be able to do that now after all these years. But the country has changed too, as you say, the growth of the nuns.
What do you think is the most important pressing issue in terms of state-church separation right now? Is it the IRS issue?
The IRS is important. We had 3 lawsuits against the IRS, and we have one that we're continuing with that we lost on standing, but we're going to regain standing. And it's an exciting story, and we'll write about it in a few months probably, especially with me and Annie Laurie and our personal IRS taxes and all that. I got to tell you something. If you're ever going to sue the IRS, make sure you've been perfectly scrupulous with your own taxes. Because the government U.S. attorney comes in and they're looking through all your past. Would you like them looking through all your past IRS forms?
I mean, I got nothing to hide. But you're right. You better have your shit in order.
Exactly.
If they're gonna,
because if they can find any one little thing, that's important. But we kind of think right now that vouchers is looming.
School vouchers?
Vouchers, yeah.
At a statewide level or at a national level?
State right now. Wisconsin, where we live, vouchers started off as a little thing. Now it's being expanded.
So this means basically they're using taxpayer money to say you can go to the school of your choice, but that includes religious schools.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and it's not just taxpayer money, but it's education money from the state for educating children. It's being diverted now under what they call parental choice. And the Supreme Court has upheld that, by the way, because the nexus was broken. You can't accuse the state of having a religious motivation if it gets into the hands of the parents and then they make their decision. So we could never challenge that on the Establishment Clause under the current Supreme Court decisions. So in Wisconsin, they're trying to expand that now. And almost all of those other schools that parents, non-state schools, they're almost all religious. And a lot of them are really bad. And a lot of them...
And I mean, we're talking teaching creationism.
Yeah.
We're talking anti-sex education, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And many of them, they don't have the same state standards. They don't have the same state accountability. They don't have the requirement to accept disabilities. If there's students that are doing bad, they can just dump them back on the school system. And,
so it's bad education.
Yeah.
Period.
And we're making that point as well. In fact, Patrick, one of our attorneys, Patrick, is becoming quite an expert on this whole voucher issue all over the country. That's really scary because your tax dollars and my tax dollars are going to some family to support them in some cult where their school might consist of, like I think it was Mississippi or Louisiana, it was a bunch of kids sitting in a living room watching videos all day. That was it. They were getting state money, and they were watching creationism videos, and they were getting that was state education money was going for that, which not only is bad for education, but it's bad for the public schools because it's draining resources away from the public schools. They still have to keep their doors open and still have to welcome
public school teachers, which I was one for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't like vouchers for that reason too. It's diverting money from the public schools.
Yeah, we think those private schools should exist and can exist if they pay for themselves. Like Ben Franklin said, a good religion will support itself. But as soon as a religion starts needing the help of the government, then it's not a good religion. It's failing in its ability. It needs help from the taxpayers. So we're all for this freedom of school choice as long as you pay for your own choice. Like private school, like at a private college, right? What would happen if the state you live in decided to take state public money to go into these private colleges to educate,
Like,
same thing.
They should be able to pay for themselves. I have one last question. Every time I see Freedom from Religion Foundation mentioned, especially in like whether they're quoting a pastor or it's right-wing media or something, they're always like, oh, it's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, as if I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. But how do you guys respond to that one?
Because they're saying that the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So there's freedom of religion in the First Amendment, but there's no freedom from religion. And we have to point out, it's the same word. In fact, in some languages, you can't say it. In Spanish, you can't say that. It's the same word, of and from. It's the same word. So we have to point out that you can't have freedom of religion if you don't have freedom from religion. If the government's telling you have to be religious, is that religious freedom? So there is freedom from religion. In fact, that establishment clause basically is freedom from religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So the government is free from religion. People are not. Mm-hmm. We don't sue people. We sue governments. There's a difference between free speech and government speech. So when people speak, that's fine. But when the government speaks or acts, that's where there's freedom from religion in our government. Our government is supposed to be neutral.
Excellent. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. And where can people find your book, and where can they find FFRF?
Well, Godless has been out since 2008, and Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword to that. Life-Driven Purpose is just out this spring with Pitchstone Publications. It's online. We just did an audiobook of it, and Daniel Dennett read the foreword,
Nice.
which is kind of cool. And now we're making an audiobook, finally, 7 years late, of Godless.
Great.
And Richard Dawkins is going to read the foreword to that. And then Richard and I have a new book coming out next spring.
And what's that going to be about?
You remember that famous sentence in chapter 2 of The God Delusion where he says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, and unforgiving race. He goes on, he's 19.
All these adjectives.
Well, each of those adjectives is a chapter of the book.
And it's about what? This is why you shouldn't believe in God. Here's where he is genocidal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The one about genocidal has all the he wanted help to actually he said he's got more criticism from that one sentence than anything else he's ever written. So it's going to be all there. And what we are doing is we're inviting people to read the Bible. Yeah. What do you want? Here's the Bible. Here's the book that you like.
As in, here's all the quotations to justify those
each
passages.
one of those. Yeah, and there's more than 2,000 Bible passages in the book documenting not just those 19, but I added 8 more. that Dawkins overlooked. Uh-huh. Part 1 says Dawkins was right, but part 2 of the book says Dawkins was too kind. So it's Sterling Publications. That won't be out until probably next February. But
that sounds awesome. That won't stir up anyone's anger. That sounds fun. Excellent. And they can go to ffrf.org if they want to become members, or
if they want to join, or if you just want some help. If you have a state church problem, there's a legal form there. You can fill it out, and one of our attorneys will get back to you right away.
Yeah, and I can't say personally how many times I've gotten emails from listeners or readers who say, this is going on in my high school. I don't know what to do. And that's exactly where I send them. Fill out this form. Let me hook you up with an FFRF attorney because they know this stuff. They know what they're doing, and they will help you out.
And if it's a school thing, it's high priority. They're really quick. And they might say, hey, I just found out they're praying at my graduation next Tuesday. So we got to get on it like right now. Before quitting time, we got to get that letter out to that school. So.
Yeah, those attorneys are very hard.
They're wonderful people. And you know, it's a nonprofit job, so they're not going to make millions of bucks, but they just love the work to make. I saw Andrew a year ago going, I love my job. He was in his office because he helped stop some bullying in a Florida school, and he was actually able to make a difference in somebody's life.
Awesome.
You know.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois, and the music was written and performed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant. That's He-Man-T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blumke. We hope you'll join us next time.